He tracked an orc girl all night. Then he realized werewolves were her dinner. He thought he was tracking a monster. The blood trail was too heavy, the footprints too deep, the broken trees too wide apart for any normal beast. Something huge had crossed the forest in the dark, and something even worse was chasing it. Then he found her, an orc girl. She was on one knee in the mud, breathing hard, one hand pressed to a deep wound in her side, the other wrapped around the throat of a dead werewolf. Not a small one, a full-grown nightmare ripped open like prey. Her armor was shattered, her skin was streaked with blood, her eyes burned like she was still ready to kill whatever came next. Then the howls started again. Not one, not two, a whole pack. He should have run. Any sane man would have. But when the orc girl tried to stand, stumbled and nearly dropped her blade, he moved before fear could stop him. He grabbed her arm. She turned on him like she might tear him apart, and in that exact moment, something huge moved between the trees behind them. He did not wait to see what stepped out of the trees. The moment he heard branches snap behind them, he pulled the orc girl toward him and dragged her off the trail. She almost fought him, but she was too weak, too hurt, and the sound of the pack closing in was too near. He forced her weight over his shoulder and pushed through thorns, wet brush, and black mud until his legs felt ready to break. His cabin stood far from the village, half hidden between dead pines and stone. It was small, crooked, and old, with a leaking roof, one narrow bed, a fire pit, and shelves filled with dried herbs, patched tools, and traps waiting to be repaired. It was not a place for a guest. It was barely a place for a man. But it was all he had. He laid her down on his own bed and stepped back, breathing hard. In the firelight, she looked even more impossible. Taller than any woman he had ever seen, broad-shouldered, scarred, strong even while bleeding. Her broken armor was not the rough iron of some wandering fighter. It was fitted, engraved, and marked with symbols he did not understand. Whoever she was, she did not belong in a poor hunter's cabin. He lived alone because people preferred it that way. The village bought his pelts, took his labor, and spoke to him only when they had to. He was useful, not wanted, quiet, not respected, but he knew wounds, fever, and poison, so he did what his hands had always done when no one else would help. He cut away the ruined leather at her side. The claw wound was deep. Black veins spread from it. Poison. He cleaned it, burned the infected edges, packed it with crushed herbs. Her body shook once, but she never cried out. Then her hand moved. It caught his wrist so fast he almost shouted. Her eyes opened, sharp, awake, dangerous. "Why?" she said, her voice low and rough. "Am I in a human bed?" He swallowed. "Because you were dying." She stared at him for a long second, then slowly released his wrist. Outside, something circled the cabin, and a moment later, 3 heavy knocks hit the door. He froze. The knocks came again, slow, heavy, deliberate. The orc girl was already trying to rise, one hand reaching for a blade that was no longer at her side. Her face tightened with pain, but her eyes stayed hard. Whatever was outside, she knew enough not to trust it. He snatched up his hunting spear and moved toward the door. "Stay down," he whispered. Her lip curled faintly, like the idea of taking orders from a human insulted her even now. The knocking stopped. Then came a low scraping sound along the outer wall. Something sniffed at the wood, something large. Neither of them moved. The cabin fire cracked softly. Rain tapped the roof. The thing outside circled once. Then the sound faded back into the trees. He stayed at the door a long moment before lowering the spear. When he turned, she was still watching him. Not like prey, not like an enemy either, more like she was measuring him against something she had expected and finding the shape wrong. "You should have let me fight," she said. "You could barely stand. I can still kill." He looked at the blood soaking the bandage on her side. Maybe, but not before it killed you." She said nothing after that. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the forest grey and dripping. He checked his traps, brought water from the stream, and returned to find her awake, sitting against the wall with stiff, guarded posture. She had not touched the bowl of broth he left near the bed. "You need food," he said. She glanced at the thin broth and looked almost offended. "This is water with regret in it." He stared at her, then let out a short laugh before he could stop himself. Her eyes narrowed. "Did I say something funny?" "No," he said, hiding the smile as he set down a rabbit he had caught. "But now I know you're not dying." That earned him silence, but it was a different silence than before. He skinned the rabbit by the fire while she watched. When he offered her cooked meat, she took it without thanks. She ate like someone trained never to waste movement, never to show hunger. Still, he noticed how quickly the food vanished. When he handed her the second half, his half, she paused. "You have little," she said. "You need it more." "In my clan," she said after a moment, "the strongest eats first. In my world," he replied, feeding wood into the fire, "the one bleeding gets fed first." She looked at him for a long time after that. The days settled into a strange rhythm. He changed her bandages morning and night. She hated showing weakness, but she stopped fighting him when he cleaned the wound. He kept the door barred after sunset. She noticed. She never thanked him, but once, while he was hauling water, he returned to find a sharpened knife placed beside his chair. Not hidden, offered. He understood the meaning. Protection returned for protection. That night, the pain hit her harder than before. Sweat covered her skin. Her breathing turned uneven. The poison was fighting the herbs. He crushed more leaves, cooled her skin with damp cloth, and stayed awake beside the bed, feeding the fire so the cold would not take what the wound had spared. Near dawn, in the weakest voice he had heard from her yet, she said, "Why are you still here?" He thought the answer would be simple. It wasn't. "No one ever stayed for me," he said quietly, "so I decided I would not be that kind of man." For the first time, something in her expression changed. Not pride, not anger, something quieter. She turned her face toward the fire and closed her eyes, but not before he saw it. That brief look of pain that had nothing to do with the wound in her side. And outside, beyond the weak circle of firelight, a long howl rose through the trees. This time, it was closer. The howl did not come again right away, but neither of them slept after hearing it. By sunrise, the cabin felt smaller. He stepped outside with his bow and found tracks in the wet earth behind the woodpile. Not wolf tracks, bigger, heavier. The claws dug deeper, as if whatever had circled the cabin had not only come close, it had waited. When he came back in, she was already standing, barely. One hand braced against the wall, the other pressed to. Her side, jaw tight with pain, she clearly refused to admit. "You should be in bed," he said. "You should stop saying foolish things," she replied, but her voice lacked its old bite. It sounded worn now, thinner around the edges. He moved closer anyway. "If that thing comes back tonight, I need to know whether you can fight." She held his gaze. "If it comes back tonight, it is not here for you." That should have comforted him. Instead, it chilled him. The day passed in uneasy work. He reinforced the shutters, reset his traps closer to the cabin, and brought in every piece of firewood he had left. She watched from the doorway for a while, silent under a wool blanket that looked far too small on her. The sight was strange, enough to almost make him smile. Someone built like a war monument wrapped in his patched old cloth. By afternoon, she called him over. Not sharply, not like a command, just his direction, with a slight lift of her fingers. When he knelt to change the bandage, he saw the poison had stopped spreading. The wound was still ugly, but cleaner now. He worked in silence until she finally asked, "Do humans always live like this? He knew what she meant. The crooked walls, the thin supplies, the way every object in the cabin had been repaired 3 times before being replaced. "Some do," he said. "The lucky ones live better." "And you?" He tied the fresh cloth around her side. "I live." That answer seemed to bother her more than if he had complained. She looked toward the fire, then said almost reluctantly, "In my world, a hunter who survives alone is respected." He gave a faint shrug. "In mine, a man who lives alone, too long becomes something people talk around." She studied him with new attention, as if she were only now seeing the shape of his loneliness. That night, while the stew simmered, she finally spoke, without him pulling words out of her. "There were 5 of us," she said. He looked up, "tracking the pack." Her eyes stayed on the fire. "I was the strongest. I was the leader. I told them I knew the forest. I told them I understood the beasts." Her hand tightened slowly over the blanket. "I was wrong." He said nothing. She did not seem like someone who gave pain away easily. If she was speaking now, it was because the words had burned too long inside her. "They separated us," she continued, "not by force, by fear, calls in the dark, false trails, blood placed where it should not be. By the time I understood, 2 were already dead. The 3rd begged me not to leave him. I did anyway. I heard him screaming before dawn. The fire popped between them. He had seen her tear through a werewolf, had seen the size of her strength, but this was the first time she looked wounded somewhere deeper than flesh. "That is why they hunt you," he said quietly. Her face hardened again. "That is why I hunt them," he nodded once. He understood that answer too well, not because he had fought monsters, but because he knew what it meant to keep moving, only because stopping would force you to feel everything. After a while, he set the bowl of stew near her. She stared into it. "No raw meat?" she asked. "That depends," he said. "Are you planning to insult my cooking again?" A small sound escaped her then, not quite a laugh, but close enough that he looked up. It changed her face. For one brief moment, she did not look like a warrior or a hunted thing or some dangerous stranger who had crashed into his life. She looked tired. Young, almost, and very alone. She ate with him that night, not across the room, but by the same fire. Later, when the wind rose, she noticed him reach for the spear before bed. "You think they will come?" she said. "I think something wants you badly enough to ignore walls." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "If you knew what I was before you carried me here, would you still have done it?" He should have answered quickly. Instead, he looked at her, the scarred hands, the noble armor stacked in the corner, the controlled way she hid pain, the hunger in her eyes when the forest howled. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I would do it now." She turned away too fast, as if the words had struck somewhere unguarded. Then, just past midnight, one of his traps snapped outside. A second later, something slammed hard against the cabin door. The first blow nearly tore the door from its frame. Wood cracked. Ash jumped from the fire. He grabbed the spear and moved on instinct, but the Orc Girl was faster. She was already up, pain and all, one hand on the wall, the other reaching for the blade he had hidden beneath the table. Another hit came. Then a voice from outside, deep, sharp, and speaking in the Orc tongue. The change in her face was immediate. Not fear, recognition. She closed her eyes for one brief second, like the worst thing possible had arrived, and it was not the beasts in the forest. Then she looked at him. "Open it," he stared at her. "You know who that is?" "Yes." The door shook again. "Open it," she repeated, harder this time. He should not have listened. Every warning in his body told him not to, but something in her voice had changed. Not weakness, not request, rank. He lifted the bar. The door swung inward, and 3 armored orcs filled the entrance like a wall of iron and rain. They were massive, scarred, armed for war. Their armor matched hers, not exactly, but close enough that he understood at once what he had been too blind to see before. The markings on her broken chestplate, the quality of the steel, the way she had carried silence like authority. The orc stepped inside and dropped to one knee, not to him, to her. "Commander Kaelra," the tallest one said, head lowered. "We have searched for you for 6 nights." The room went still. Commander, Elias, looked at her as if the word itself had struck him. She did not correct it, did not deny it. She only stood straighter despite the pain in her side, and for the first time since he had found her in the mud, she looked exactly like what she was, someone born to be obeyed. The cabin suddenly felt absurd around her. Too small, too poor, too human. "You lied," he said. Her eyes shifted to him. "I withheld." A bitter laugh almost came out of him. "That has a finer sound, doesn't it?" The kneeling orcs glanced at him now, and the contempt on their faces was immediate. One looked at the bed, the blanket, the herbs, the bowl near the fire. His mouth tightened in visible disgust. "This human sheltered you?" he asked her, like the idea itself was offensive. Kaelra ignored the insult. "Report," the tallest warrior rose. "The Black Fang pack has moved east. They are no longer roaming. They are being led." That got her full attention. "By whom?" she asked. The warrior hesitated. "By one of our own." Silence hit the room harder than the storm outside. Elias did not understand every layer of it, but he understood enough. Betrayal. Not just beasts, not just a hunt gone wrong. Something worse had been hiding under all of it. Kaelra's face darkened. "Say the name." The warrior looked down. "General Rorvak." Even wounded, she seemed to go still in a dangerous way. Elias watched the pieces crash together in his mind. The werewolves had not simply found her. Someone had fed them her path. Someone powerful, someone close enough to know where she would go and how she would fight. "You said there were 5 of you," he said quietly. "You said they died because you were wrong." Her jaw tightened. "I was wrong," she said, but now the words came rougher. "Wrong about who I could trust." The other orc finally turned fully toward Elias. "You have heard too much." Kaelra's answer came like steel. "He lives." The warrior bowed his head at once. "As you command." That should have reassured Elias. It did the opposite. "As you command." Not because he mattered. Because she had spoken. He looked at the woman who had eaten by his fire, worn his blanket, let him touch the wound at her side. Then he looked at the soldiers kneeling in his dirt-floor cabin like they were standing in a throne hall. How important. "Are you?" he asked. She met his gaze without warmth now, without softness, because softness was gone from the room. "I lead the Southern War Host," she said. "I answer only to the High Throne." The words landed like a blade between them. Not a lost warrior, not a hunted stranger, not some fierce woman with a secret. A commander, a name feared by enemies, a person with power large enough to move armies, and she had slept in his bed while he thought he was saving someone abandoned. Outside, another horn sounded from the dark forest. The warrior spoke fast. "Black Fang is moving toward the human village. At the ridge. If Rorvak has joined them, he will want witnesses dead and blame placed on beasts." Elias went cold. His village. Kaelra turned toward the door at once. Duty took her face, her posture, her voice. "We move now." He stepped back. From her, she noticed. For the first time since meeting him, something uncertain flickered in her eyes. "Elias," but the distance had already opened. "You did not need me," he said. Her answer came at once, sharp with something deeper than anger. "I needed the one person who touched me without asking what I could give him. That should have pulled him closer. Instead, it hurt more, because now he knew exactly who had said it, and before he could answer, a scream rose from far off in the direction of the village. The scream from the ridge tore the last hesitation out of him. Elias was moving before the orcs reached the tree line. He grabbed his bow, his trapwire, 2 oil flasks, and the old hunting axe from beside the hearth. Kaelra caught his arm once, hard enough to stop him. "You do not understand what waits there," she said. "No!" he shot back, pulling free. "But I know those roads, those fields, the ditches, the old grain pits. Your warriors don't." For 1 second, commander and man stood facing each other, both too proud to yield, both too afraid to lose the other. Then Kaelra gave the order to move. They reached the ridge under a sky of broken clouds and red firelight. The village was already half chaos. Doors hung open, livestock screamed. Men who had once looked through Elias like smoke now ran blindly with farm tools in their hands, and between the burning sheds and shattered fences moved the Black Fang pack. Not hunting, herding, driving people together. At their center stood a figure broader than the others, wrapped in dark armor marked with the same orc symbols Kaelra wore, General Rorvak. The traitor did not hide behind beasts. He stood among them like a king of filth, watching terror ripen. Kaelra's warriors surged forward, but Elias caught her wrist this time. "Not straight at him," he said. "He wants you angry." She looked at him, and in that instant she made the hardest choice a commander like her could make. She trusted him. He sent 2 warriors to the grain pits, one to the narrow lane between the smokehouse and well, another with oil to the hay cart. He used every poor, forgotten piece of the village, the same way poor men always survived, by knowing what stronger people overlooked. When the werewolves lunged, the ground gave way beneath them. When they turned, fire boxed them in. When Rorvak drove for the center, Kaelra met him there with a roar that shook even his own beasts. The fight broke the square apart. Elias loosed arrows until his fingers bled. He dragged a child from a doorway, cut an old man free from a collapsed cart. Then he looked up and saw Rorvak's blade punch through the gap in Kaelra's damaged armor. She did not fall, but the sight hollowed him. Without thinking, he ran straight into a battle no sane human should have entered. He snatched a burning spear from the ground and drove it into the chain hanging from the village bell. Metal shrieked. The bell crashed loose, swung wild, and slammed into Rorvak's shoulder with enough force to stagger even him. Kaelra needed only that breath. Her blade rose once, then it came down. When the last beast dropped, the square went silent except for fire and ragged breathing. Kaelra swayed. Elias reached her before she hit the ground. Blood ran hot over his hands. Her warriors formed a ring around them, but none came closer. They were waiting, not for orders, for her choice. Kaelra lifted her hand and gripped the front of his torn shirt. Even wounded, even shaking, she held him with the force of someone used to deciding the shape of futures. "Hear me, all of you," she said, her voice rough but carrying across the ruined square. "This human stood where armed warriors failed. He guarded me when I had no rank, no banner, no advantage. He saved my life once in the forest, and again, before my own host." The orcs lowered their heads. Elias stared at her, stunned. Then she looked only at him. And when she spoke again, the commander was still there. But so was the woman from the firelit cabin. "Come with me," she said. "Not as servant, not as debt, not as a pet kept under clan mercy." Her grip tightened. "As my chosen one, my equal before my fire, my future if you will take it. I will give you land under my protection, a place in my hall, and my name beside yours, if that is what it takes. If the clans challenge it, they will answer to me." The whole square seemed to stop breathing. For Elias, the offer struck deeper than any blade. A life, safety, belonging. Her. And with it, every fear he had ever carried. He saw the cost at once, leaving the only world he knew, walking into halls where every eye would measure his weakness, becoming the human who stood beside an orc commander powerful enough to make nations angry. "What if I don't belong there?" he asked quietly. Kaelra's expression changed then, the iron breaking open just enough to show the truth beneath it. "You already stood where you did not belong," she said, "and still you chose me." That hit the place inside him that had been empty for years. All his life he had been tolerated, used, overlooked, never chosen, never claimed, never asked to stand beside anyone instead of behind them. The village around him was burning. The old life behind him was ash. The future before him was terrifying, and for the first time it was also his to choose. Elias did not answer her in the ruined square. Not because he did not feel the pull of her words, not because he did not want the life she had placed before him like fire in winter, but because everything around them still hurt too much to pretend the choice would be simple. So he helped her stand first. That was his answer for that night. The days that followed were full of smoke, burial, and silence. The Black Fang pack was broken, General Rorvac was dead, the surviving werewolves scattered into the deep wild, leaderless and hunted. The village still stood, but only just. Homes were damaged, fields were burned, too many names were spoken softly over fresh graves, and Elias learned quickly that saving people did not make him one of them. Some villagers thanked him, more did not. Some looked at him with fear now, as if any man who could fight beside an orc commander must no longer be fully human. Others whispered that he had brought the danger to them in the first place. He had saved their lives, and still there was no place for him to return to unchanged. Kaelra paid for her choice too. Among her warriors, none openly defied her. But the cost settled in other ways. Some elders refused to speak his name. Some captains accepted Elias only because her word made refusal impossible. A few looked at him like an insult carved into living flesh. For a commander of her rank to offer herself to a poor human hunter was not romance in their eyes. It was disruption, weakness, scandal wrapped in affection. But Kaelra did not bend. When she spoke before her clan, she did not soften what had happened. She told them exactly who had sheltered her when she was wounded, exactly who had helped stop Rorvac, exactly who had stood his ground when stronger people failed. She did not ask for permission. She claimed her choice. And Elias, trembling, more inside than he showed, stepped into that world anyway. Not because he suddenly felt worthy of it, because he understood at last that worth was not something handed down by villages, clans, or bloodlines. It was built in what a person chose when fear would have been easier. Weeks later, when the dead had been honored and the roads were safe, again, Kaelra returned with him one final time to the little cabin in the forest. The place looked smaller than ever, a broken roof, a crooked wall, his patched tools, her old blood long cleaned from the floorboards. It was where she had nearly died, and where something in both of them had first begun to live. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. "I thought this was all I would ever have," he said. Kaelra came beside him, no armor now, no war paint, only scars and quiet strength. "It was enough to save me," she said. Inside, he stirred the fire back to life while she unpacked the food they had brought. Then, with a look that was almost shy, despite everything she was, she placed a plate into his hands. Cooked meat, seasoned badly, slightly burned. His mouth twitched. "This is terrible." "It is," she said with full dignity. "I made it myself." He laughed then, really laughed, and the sound filled the cabin that had once known only wind and silence. When night came, the forest howled far away, but this time the sound did not feel like a threat. It felt like distance, like something survived and left behind. Elias stepped outside and Kaelra followed. The moon hung pale above the trees where he had once tracked blood and terror through the dark. He looked at her hand, then took it. No. Command. No bargain, no fear, just choice. Together they stood at the edge of the forest where a hunted orc girl had once fallen and a lonely human had once believed he was too small to matter. Now the wolves kept their distance, and when the night wind moved through the trees, it carried not the scent of prey, but the quiet promise of home.